Yeah. Oh, no, I'm always thinking.
Good morning. Nice to see everybody. We're a slightly smaller group, as I said last evening, but wonderful to see you all and look forward to today's meeting. I'm going to keep my comments very brief, which is to say I've obviously been working still very closely with the new commissioner, thrilled to have her on board and pleased with where everything is headed. We have an agenda that effectively is focused on some highlights and updates at the program level, this notion of the rate reserve where we have a discussion and vote. I'll say more about that in a minute. And then to hear a little from the commissioner about a sort of process for very actionable strategic planning, if you will, over the next couple of months to bring us to a place where all of the strands kind of coalesce and come under a frame that feels right to the board and the commissioner and moves us forward over the next, say, 18 to 36 months, I think, in many ways. And I know the commissioner is committed to that kind of a plan with a focus on the implementation side as well. So historically, we've had sort of strategic plans that then demand an implementation plan, and I think in this case, we will merge the two in the months to come. So more on that and in the upcoming weeks. In the meantime, I have asked the commissioner in her update this morning, as I said to you last evening, somewhat unexpected, the amounts of email and sort of feedback and feelings about the rate reserve in front of us. And certainly it's not our prerogative, not our, guiding principle to want to keep money sitting at the agency, but rather get money out to the field. And I think we are talking about very significant rate increase with some concern about the differentiated approach, which has to do with a number of factors, including federal guidance. So I do want to say that from my position and perspective, I know that there has been a lot of due diligence on the commissioner's part, a lot of conversation with you all and with other key stakeholder groups, and certainly in many ways this is very consistent with our actions as a board over time. So what I have asked the commissioner to do now in her comments early on in this meeting is to just clear up some misinformation, level set on the big picture and the plan before us, and she will pick up on that again when it's an agenda item. So thanks, everybody. I'm sorry, I want to say that David Qris is on the phone, so we are joined by David. David, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thanks, David.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to apologize in advance. I was at the dentist this morning, and my upper lip is completely numb. So if I start drooling or I have trouble pronouncing B's or P's, you'll know why. I just wanted to make a quick comment, really, on the preschool development grant, which has a P in it. I'm just realizing as I'm saying it.
We're only going to give you P words.
I know, really. And specifically, we were awarded this grant about a year ago, and it's been used for a variety of purposes, but fairly specifically around developing our strategic approach towards implementing developmental screening protocols and instruments out in the field in order to create greater consistency around that screening, in particular with respect to early literacy, and to improve the quality of that screening that's going on across the Commonwealth. There's another opportunity for a follow-on grant, and this one is actually quite a bit larger. The original grant was $1.8 million. This would be a 3-year grant for $10 million per year, so that's real money. And the focus here would be certainly to continue the work that we've begun under the original grant, but also to broaden it out to involve more stakeholders and community members, and to, I think, sort of deepen our focus around moving the needle around early literacy for young people as they're moving up through early education and into elementary school. Part of this process, which hopefully will dovetail nicely both in timing and in content with the strategic planning process that the Commissioner will be talking about soon, and may provide some resources to sort of deepen and accelerate that work, is to engage a variety of stakeholders and advisors, including this board, another B word. So this is more of a heads up. The application will be going in shortly. I think the due date is November 5th. Assuming we are successful in that, we will be certainly coming back to this board and to this department to deepen the engagement and clarify the roles and responsibilities as we go forward. It's a great opportunity. I'm very hopeful that we'll be successful, but just sort of be aware that we'll be coming back to you, and in fact, I think we'll probably be briefing in more detail on the nature of the application at the next board meeting. So with that,
Great.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is this one work? No?
Good morning. Thank you all for being here and for participating in the conversation. I wanted to, as the chairwoman said, wanted to give a little bit more context for the vote today, but also take one step back and give some context for what we are actually have accomplished and some of the milestones and deadlines that we've met in the last year, some of the reflections of what's been happening in the field for the last couple of months that I've, I guess, 7 weeks that I've been here, and really to start to take a look forward as the Secretary and Chair said about today's agenda. So I first have to start by giving a big shout out to the many teams at EEC that got us over the October 1st compliance deadline or September 30th compliance deadline for the child care block grant. That was a building on new rules set forth by the federal government in 2014. I know all of you know this, but the amount of work and energy over the last few years that has gone in by this team to get us to this deadline, to make sure that we were met in compliance, but also set us on a path to live in the the vision of what the feds wanted from this grant is really been remarkable, and so want to give a shout out for all of the work that went into doing that across the teams. It was a very multifaceted overhaul to our largest funding source, and really wanted to, not only did it require business process overhaul and regulation change, but also, as I said, set us on a path of really trying to think differently about how we look at data, use data to drive our decision making, really ensure that we are doing our job of keeping children healthy and safe in the field, and really address the professionalization of the field in small incremental ways that really will be transformative overall. So while we did meet that deadline, there is a lot of work left to do, and we continue to get guidance from the feds on where and how we should be prioritizing our efforts going forward. And while we are committed to continuing to engage the field on that and really deepen the engagement with the field, which you'll hear a little bit more about in our strategic roadmap process later in the agenda, we still have many critical decisions to make on a real-time basis, one of which is here in front of you today. As I said, we continue to get guidance. We have tried really hard to, as we make those decisions, like the one in front of you today, engage providers through our many stakeholder advisory groups that we have, the programs working together. I swear I'm still learning all of the names and acronyms of all the groups, making sure that we are engaging stakeholders and advocates. And while some of the decisions we have to make in real time might not be the most popular decisions, I think that ultimately we are working really hard to use data, to use the guidance from the feds, and partner with the legislature, the Executive Office of Education, and the board to make the decisions with the best integrity that we can. That said, we also recognize that there are a number of tools that need to be updated, that early childhood is also a field where we've been working with imperfect measures and imperfect data, and that I hope that our process going forward of engaging can make sure that we are in a continuous quality improvement process ourselves, of ensuring that we are improving how we are measuring progress on an ongoing basis, while still making the very real decisions we have to make every day to support a very fragile field. So I appreciate, as Chair Lasso said, I will spend a little bit more time explaining the context of some of the decision later on when we get to that agenda item, and going deep into the federal guidance and the criteria we use for decision making on this. But I also just want to highlight, as we think about and make these decisions around what we have to do to keep children safe and what we have to do to support a fragile field that is responsible for doing so, there's real decisions happening in our programs on the field, and a real fragility that we are trying to protect. We've had multiple programs fail and close in the last few weeks, and it is very, very difficult. Sometimes we have close relationships with them and are able to do something, and sometimes we don't, and find out as they are in their last legs, and are trying really hard to support the adequate care that children and families need, and making sure that that is not only high quality but also stable and sufficient. I want to say, on that note of the team's support for programs, I want to give a huge shout out to the team in the out of the Taunton office and the team here that really worked to support Cape Cod Child Development, which was a very large agency in Cape Cod that, unfortunately, in my first week, found out that they would be putting a plan together to close. We were able to work closely with advocates in the field, with the other agencies, and try to figure out a way, and I will apologize for any missteps we made along the way as I was trying to take full responsibility. This is not the team, as I was trying to navigate very early on and very new relationships of how we could make sure that children and families on Cape Cod still had access to really critical services. The team that really did that it has been remarkable and has worked really hard to remove any possible barriers to have South Shore come in and and set up once the two agencies decided that that would be the direction that they were going. Certainly, this is not a situation we want to replicate, but I do want to make sure that the team that had worked really hard on behalf of children and families in this area, it was called out specifically. Also because I was very new and they were educating me along the way as well. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time in the remarks to just set the context of the number of stakeholders and number of stakeholders and guidance that we're getting from a number of different factors, and the challenge it is for EEC to really make difficult decisions with the information at hand, and look forward to talking a little bit more with you guys today about the decisions that are on the table for us.
Also want to just call out, I failed to mention that in my conversations with the commissioner, it's been clear to me too that the thinking and work has been in partnership with the legislature, and I think that matters greatly when we think about this particular rate reserve and vote. Okay, we have some folks signed up for public comment. Ann Osula from SEIU Local 509 with Peter Dolliber on deck.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ann Osula. I'm a provider in the Mattapan area. And I also am part of the contract negotiation for EEC and childcare. I represent all childcare providers in Massachusetts today. Childcare, early education, here, we know that it's very hard. It's a hard work. And we work to support parents. We support the school system. We do the before school, the after school. We're everywhere with the kids. But while doing this, we have little pay. We're not paid enough. So we're asking this board to support us with our contract negotiation. We're asking for more pay. We're also asking for 100% support for the paid medical leave. And if possible, if we don't get a complete 100% coverage, if we can get an extra day, we would like this board to help support that. And I can't explain much that we do this morning because of the time, but I will just say a little bit about how providers open so early in the mornings. By before 6 a.m. we're open. Some don't close till 6:30, 7 p.m. So this is very important to us that this board support us in our contract negotiation. Thank you.
Peter Dolliber with Justin, and I'm sorry, I can't quite read the name, Pasquarillo on deck. Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
I am Peter Dolliber. I am the CEO of the Alliance of Mass YMCAs, and I represent the 28 Ys in the state that offer early education and out-of-school time to over 65,000 children in the Commonwealth. Collectively, we're the largest provider of these services in the state. What I want to talk to you about this morning is the rate reserve. Since it's already been brought up, we can talk about that openly. We have had a great relationship with this department through the years and really appreciate the work this department has taken with all of the field on behalf of the families and children that we serve. And we want to see that partnership continue because it's incredibly important. It's in that same spirit of partnership that we've worked with the legislators to address one of the major issues we have, which is, as the commissioner said, it's a very fragile system. One of the things that makes it very fragile is the difficulty in offering quality care because of the difficulty in keeping teachers and recruiting good teachers. It's through that effort that for the past several years we have been successful in getting additional rate reserve for the dollars to go to centers to pay for those teachers. So it took us by surprise a bit when we heard that potentially today you're going to be asked to vote on a change in the rate reserve that we think is unprecedented. It is our understanding that you're going to be asked to take some of those dollars to reach the 30 percentile of the market rate based upon federal guidance. We do understand that need, but we do not believe that taking out of these funds is the right way to do that. These funds are allocated based upon a flat rate for everyone. Budgets have been set on that. Teachers have been hired based upon that. Pay rates have been set. To now change that by taking money from some to give to others will create a problem for a lot of centers that are not in the regions that are targeted for the change to bring it to the 30th percentile. That is not, I'm sure, not what the department would want, not what this board would want, and would not be the intention. We think it would be an unintended consequence, but we want to point that out, that would be a problem. There are also other places the funds can come from. The Ccdbg money that is allocated to the state has not been fully used yet. The $3 to $4 million that we understand this would take, that potentially could come out of those funds. Also, this department, in my experience, has usually tens of millions of dollars in reserve left over at the end of its budget cycle. To come up with $3 or $4 million for that should not be difficult. We strongly urge you to not change what has been worked on so hard by the field in order to get better rates, in order to keep quality teachers, and not to make for an unfair part where smaller centers not in the target area, will lose money that they have planned on in order to meet this requirement when there are other funds available. I'm assuming no questions. So, yay! Yes,
Okay, I
ma'am.
have to talk loudly, right? I'm just wondering if you, from the WISE, have any data on teacher retention. Does it coordinate with the increase in rate?
I cannot give you the specific figures, but I can tell you that we are seeing in the last 5 years, and not just with the WISE, but in talking with our colleagues with other centers, as we have been able to improve the rates, our retention has improved. And more importantly, the quality in the classrooms has improved. But as the commissioner said, it's still a very, very fragile field.
Right, right. Thank you.
Good morning, Peter.
Good morning.
I'm wondering if the choice before us is essentially to delay substantially rollout of these dollars to the field in order to engage in a deeper process that may or may not impact the end result. What is your perspective on the merits of delay?
Sure, great question. And I'm going to answer it roundabout and then directly. First, we would welcome working with you and working with the department to help figure out this percentile part, because the market rate is not really well done. It's very difficult. When we went to the 25%, it caused some unintended problems. We'd be very happy to work with everyone through that. I don't believe the only option is to delay. I do believe that the option is to pass the rate reserve and then work with you on where to find the funding to come up to the 30 percentile. But I would feel confident, I'll speak on behalf of the WISE, we would prefer to retain what we budgeted for at the rate at which we were promised it and what was approved in the budget. That was what we take as a promise, an approved budget. We would prefer to stay at that and then work with you to get the additional money where it's necessary in those regions to bring it up to 30% and potentially delay that a month or two, than to take money away from centers now.
And if that's not in fact the set of choices in front of us, how do you feel about delay?
If the delay is to allow us to maintain the money that is in the rate reserve, then we would prefer a delay than a reduction.
I don't have the language in front of me, but what is the language in the line item with respect to the rate reserve and its allocation?
And I apologize, Secretary Powers, I do not have it in front of me either.
Does it specify an across-the-board rate increase for all center-based providers?
The language is not specific one way or the other.
So
The way in which it has been done and the way in which we entered into it with the legislators and what has been done over the last several years, it is an across-the-board rate increase.
But it's not specified in the statute and has
You
not.
are correct, but it's also not specified in the statute that it can be carved up.
It leaves the discretion to the board, as I understand. Is that correct?
I would say that this board in its history has always understood the intent of the field, and that the field has worked at this for a flat rate reserve. not to be carved up and differentiated, and the board has always respected the field in that way.
But the legislature has never adopted language, even though the field presumably has asked for it. Is that true?
The field has never asked for it because it's never been necessary, because it has always been understood that it was a rate reserve was for all, not by region. So, it would almost be like saying, and I mean this with all respect possible, sir, it's like saying stop at a stop sign. I mean, we didn't think we'd have to put language in there because it has never come up before.
Well, with all due respect, there's a lot of language in a budget specifying how funds are to be spent, and the legislature is not shy about expressing their intent in the language. And I think their intent, based on the plain language in the line item, is that it's up to the discretion of this board to determine how that rate increase will be allocated. Now, I don't disagree that what the history has been and what expectations may have been set. But in terms of legislative intent or in terms of the authority of the board to act in this measure, I don't think the legislature has done anything to undermine or to derogate from the authority of the board to make this decision on its own.
I would respectfully disagree with you in that I'll agree with you to this extent. I don't think the legislature ever would intend to impede the actions of this board or the work of this board. And I don't think that would ever be their intent. I don't believe that from being one of the individuals that has worked closely with the legislature on this and has worked on this rate reserve over the last several years, the conversations have always been around a universal increase. And there's never been any thought given to changing that or doing anything differently with it. I would respectfully disagree with you, sir, that if legislators that had worked hard on this were to hear that it was being changed, I do not think that would rest well with all of them. I understand what you're saying, that there is not specific language to it, but there's also not specific language to either not do it or to do it, because the understanding was it is a rate reserve across the state. It does not differentiate it by region or for purpose other than to increase the rate.
So just a couple things. I mean, we certainly have precedent in this table for some differentiated approaches to when we have put more money out to the field. Mm-hmm. What I hear you saying is the 2.8 million is effectively being taken away from others. So we have this 3.51 for everybody. And then we have a bump for 2 regions on the basis of the market rate, which, we've always used that, imperfect as it is. So what we're really talking about is that $2.8 million.
Correct. And to your point, Madam Chair, it is a relatively small amount of money in the scheme of all things.
But particularly when you get to the center level.
Correct.
I mean, when you get to the level of putting the dollars out into the field.
Right.
We are not talking about withholding meaningful amounts of money from the field.
But you're still talking about changing a percentage for different locations.
Which we have done a number of times at this table.
But not through the rate reserve. You have not, to the best of my knowledge, it's not been done through this pot of funding. And the concern is setting that precedent, and this is not in any way to tie the hands of the board or not to work together with you or to address these very serious pressing issues that we want to work with you on. The concern we have is that when centers have done their budgets based upon the amount of money they're anticipating, based upon an approved budget, and a process which has been in place for several years, which I think is a realistic expectation, without warning to have this change without expectation of that, and when there are other solutions available to this board that we're very happy to work with you on, we recognize the federal mandates are difficult and we want to work with you. And we do believe there's other pots of funding possible. The concern is that taking even a small amount out of this is going to negatively impact somebody somewhere. And that most certainly was not the intent of those of us that worked on this or worked with the legislature on it. I mean, I agree with you totally. It's a small amount, and we totally understand that it's within this board's purview. We're just trying to express to you that it would not be a good precedent to set, and that there are other alternatives, and that we want to continue working with you to help the field.
Can I ask, you mentioned that there was an expected rate that people were budgeting on, and Chair Lasso mentioned the rate we're voting on today is a universal 3.51. Can you, this is the first I'm hearing there was an expected rate. Can you tell me what the actual expected rate was that people were?
Based upon past history of the same dollar amounts And what that rate turned into, people were expecting about 4.5% to 5%.
Okay. I'm not sure the legislation, the way the legislative language would have let us get to that amount anyway. We can, yeah. I'm
Well,
not-
and to
is
be
that-
clear,
yeah.
the language in the rate reserve doesn't address it that specifically because it's all based upon the number of individuals enrolled. So that we realize that fluctuates.
Yeah, sorry, the language in the budget specifically does call out the special populations add-on this year, so that's what wouldn't allow us to get to above, to quite that level regardless, so.
Right.
Just as a matter of process, I am personally surprised that none of this came up in all of the reconnaissance with these other groups and stakeholders. This is the first time it came up, was yesterday afternoon. The emails that I'm getting actually have the wrong numbers. They're not actually accurate. So I just want to call out for on our side that from a process perspective, this was not a surprise. This has been in the works. There have been conversations with key stakeholders, including folks at the table from the provider community. And so I just want to name that in terms of the way we're having this conversation at this juncture.
Well, and to your point, Madam Chair, I'm not sure where the breakdown was. I mean, I represent a fair share of the providers in the state. I've been talking with my colleagues who represent pretty much every other provider in the state, and we did not know about this until yesterday afternoon. So I'm not saying that it wasn't communicated. I'm not saying efforts weren't taken, but somewhere there was a breakdown. This has taken us by surprise.
First of all, wondering if we can actually see a copy of the legislative language. That's possible. That would be helpful.
At the time of the
Yep.
agenda item, we'll keep moving with public comment.
And I want to make sure that we are understanding the intertwined issues that are in front of us right now, right? On the one hand, we have legislative intent and we have history and precedent that set a certain degree of expectation relative to this particular pot of money, but we also know that there have been other monies, whether it's through Ccdbg or through supplementals, that have enabled the board to move out differentiated rates in different
Absolutely.
ways and at different times.
Right.
We also know that there is nothing in, we're going to take another look at it, but it sounds like based on, there's uniform agreement that there's nothing in the current legislative language that would preclude discretion by the board to utilize these dollars differently. And based on my conversations with the legislature, I believe that that is in fact intentional because there's recognition that at some point we may need to move toward a tiered rate system and that rate reserve will have a role to play in that. So you know, but I also hear that there is a question of process and communication that is not at all unimportant. And I think that there is something, you know, critical about how this information gets processed, the opportunities for input, and all of that. At the same time, at the end of the day, our primary responsibility is to improve access and quality in the field for children and families. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to take account of the process that would be involved in doing that today, and whether there might be some remedial steps that could be taken going forward if in fact these dollars go out and the detrimental impacts that you describe do in fact occur, or whether given this very small increment, those shifts would be in fact more manageable at the level of the program.
And please know, we still look at ourselves as your partner. I mean, we still want to work with you. This is not intended to be adversarial or difficult. It has just taken us by surprise. Mm-hmm. We just want to make sure the process is clean and clear. Mm-hmm. We want to work with the department. We don't want anyone being damaged. We want children, as you said, taken care of. We fully understand and have worked with you in the past when you have had other pots of money and have worked out different rates in different places. We recognize and very much appreciate the commissioner coming in and looking at things with a different lens and really working hard to understand the field and the process and the people and the circumstances that make this very difficult and make it fragile. So this is not intended at all to be a criticism or a critique. It is meant to raise the flag of how we can work together. And you are correct that it is a relatively small amount of money. We just want to really get off on the right foot. We just really want to make sure we're still working in that sense of partnership and that we're all accomplishing those things in lockstep that will support the field, serve our families.
And that's critically important, I think, to everyone here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Justin Pasquarillo from East Boston Social Centers with Lindsay McCluskey on deck.
Good morning, board members. Good morning, Secretary, Commissioner. Hope I'm not too late in welcoming you to the Commonwealth and congratulating you on your new role. Thank you. I'm the Executive Director of the East Boston Social Centers. We're a 101-year-old organization that provides early education and care and a variety of other programs. We reach approximately 150 children from 2 months to 5 years, and then a similar number of kids in school-age programming. And I'm also here this morning to ask that you please consider at least tabling the rate reserve implementation vote until the November meeting. And I hope that when you do vote, that the vote will be for the full rate reserve to be invested in the entire fields rather than in just some regions. So there are 3 reasons that I'm asking for this, some of which overlap with reasons that we've talked about. And I should mention I'm also a board member of MADCA. So our hope for implementation in coordination with the legislature was the hope that we've been talking about. There's a significant need across the entire Commonwealth, and the market rate mechanism, as has been discussed here, is flawed and needs to be fixed. So first, our hope for implementation, and I have copies of this that I'll pass out as well. In recent years, the entire field from the Berkshires to East Boston has worked with legislative leaders to secure equal percentage increases across the state, and those make a positive difference across the state. And as has been stated, there isn't a precedent for EEC substantively amending the legislative rate reserve. So we think that that 30-day time period might allow for finding common ground on this question. So second, while we know that there are specific needs in specific regions, there's significant need across the Commonwealth. As is true for every other program across the state that provides similar early education programming, the rate reserve is vital to our program's ability to provide high-quality services to children and families in East Boston and surrounding communities. And as is true for others, nearly 80 cents of each rate reserve dollar, if not more, positively impacts the social center's early educator workforce and ensures a livable wage. We're very grateful for continued legislative support and for this being a priority. And we need this support because compensation costs are rising rapidly. There's going to be a 6.5% increase in the minimum wage in this coming year. And because of where the pay scale is, even with the increases that we've had, that does mean kind of upward pressure for our workforce. Additionally, there's Massachusetts Medical Leave Act that will impact providers across the Commonwealth. And then we each face our own additional costs. For myself at the East Boston Social Centers, we currently provide care in 3 public housing facilities, all of which will be demolished within the next year, leading us to have to find new facilities that will be at a higher cost so that we ensure that our kids are served without disruption. And I just say that as representative of costs that providers across the Commonwealth face. And then finally, as has been discussed here, the imperfect market rate mechanism. We provide care in East Boston. Our early educator workforce lives in one of the highest cost of living cities in America, as we know. And yet, when you hear today of the need to raise rates in the highest market rate regions, Boston is not included. So that kind of speaks to what we believe to be the flaws in the measuring tool that is being used to establish market rates. So the regions, for example, would lead to higher rate funding for salaries of deserving, hardworking early educators in Quincy, but would not do the same in Boston. And we at MADCA would like to work with everyone to help to fix that flawed mechanism. So on behalf of my colleagues at MADCA, I again ask you to consider tabling till November this decision. And thank you for your time, your consideration, and your partnership.
Lindsay McCluskey with Steve Huntley on deck.
Good morning, Commissioner, Secretary, and members of the board. My name is Lindsay McCluskey. I am the Deputy Director of Community Labor United here in Boston. We convene a Boston-based coalition called Care That Works, where we bring together unions and community organizations who have a shared interest in making sure that the childcare system works better for working-class people in the Commonwealth, from childcare providers to construction workers to everything in between. We're currently developing a pilot program in the Boston area that will build the supply of childcare that's available during non-traditional work hours to enable low-income moms to pursue careers in fields such as construction, hospitality, and other industries that have non-standard schedules. As you probably know, in Massachusetts, 42% of low-income children under 13 have parents who work when most licensed childcare providers are not open. Our childcare system was built for 9-to-5 work, but we do not live in a 9-to-5 world. In order to meet the demands of today's economy, our coalition is working hard to address the needs for childcare during non-standard hours by piloting a network of family childcare providers in the Boston area who are willing to offer care during these hours. I look forward to continuing to update the board on our progress as this pilot project progresses. However, my main purpose here today is to speak in support of a fair contract for family childcare providers. My 2.5-year-old son, Julian, has been in the care of family childcare providers since he was 5 months old. The experience of having my first child and returning to work was overwhelming, and I'll never forget the morning when I dropped him off for the first time and walked away, wiping tears from my eyes. Family childcare was undoubtedly the right choice for my family. We found a provider who lives in our community, whose home is warm and inviting, whose care we can afford, and most importantly, who our son loves and trusts and looks forward to seeing every morning. She's like Wonder Woman to our family. It's her work that makes our work possible. But it's no secret that the number of family childcare providers in Massachusetts have sharply declined in recent years, due in part to the low reimbursement rates that make it hard for providers to make a living in the field. Like many other forms of care work, family childcare is too often undervalued and underpaid. Unfortunately, our society often values the work of women and the work of direct care providers, work that I would argue is perhaps the most important in our society, far less than other occupations. It's important for us to recognize that this is not some kind of mistake, it's a choice. It's a choice that political leaders make about what work matters and what does not. And we hope that Massachusetts can set an example of leading in another way. A strong contract with fair rates for family childcare providers will benefit not just providers themselves, but families like mine and entire communities as well. When family childcare providers are respected and better compensated for their work, they can better serve children and families who depend on them. I'm here today standing in shoulder to shoulder with my sister from SEIU Local 509, who previously spoke, calling for a fair contract for family childcare providers that includes a fair rate increase and 100% support for PFML, or in lieu of that, an extra PTO day. Family childcare providers, like all workers, deserve to live and work with dignity and respect. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Steve Huntley from Valley Opportunity Council.
Excuse me. Good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Huntley. I'm Executive Director of Valley Opportunity Council. VOC is a community action agency in Holyoke, Chicopee, and all of Hampden County. We touch about 45,000 people per year and 900 children in our early education programs. I was an active member of the committee that did the market rate study last year. I brought it with me. And I'm here to tell you that it's absolutely flawed for Western Mass. The bottom line, just to cut to the chase, a lot of people have said a lot of things. I met in this very room 8 times. I drove from Western Mass here 8 times in order to make sure this market rate study was successful. I called friends, I called colleagues, I called all sorts of people in order to try and get the market rate out in Western Mass to actually reflect the market rate in Western Mass. The reality is my friends that own for-profit companies did not respond to the market rate. They are not in this study. The folks that are in this study are VOC, Square One, Head Start, et cetera, et cetera. the bottom line is our market rate is essentially a few dollars more than the rate EEC pays us. That's not the cost that it takes to open a classroom every day. That's what our market rate is. We subsidize it. We all subsidize it, at least all of us that are still doing it today, and we've lost many over the last 10 years. Those that still do it today know we have to subsidize it with other programming. That's why I tell you that we have 45,000 people we touch, with 900 being early ed. We also have been one of the few organizations in our region with a growth. We're expanding capacity. Over the last 10 years since the last bid, we have 150 more kids in care than we did there in our center-based system. And I don't know the number of our family base, but our family daycare provider numbers have grown from the 40s to just over 100. So we have a lot more kids in care. And part of that commitment to growth in a losing proposition program financially is the even rates that we've gotten every year. Statewide reimbursement rates going up were a signal to us that this was an area we could grow in. When we start to tier the structure, when we start to give more to other regions than ours, it really sets a solid message to us that I was foolish for growing the last 5-6 years, and we need to turn the corner and start thinking about shrinking. Let's put some numbers to that. I'm a big numbers guy. Numbers tell the story. So off of EEC's website from yesterday, I downloaded it. The Region 1 toddler rate is $54.33. The Region 4 is $71.13. That's $16.80 per child per day. You multiply that out by the kids in a classroom, it's $151.20 per classroom. Today, we get less than Region 4. I understand higher costs for rent, things like that. There are clear studies out there that show if you add the cost of transportation to the cost of rent, it's not that far off. We're very close. We have to own cars in Western Mass to get to work. If you are fortunate, you can rent near a T-stop, you can take a train in or a bus anywhere you need to go out here at a far less costly endeavor than buying, insuring, maintaining, and putting gas in an automobile. So keeping that in mind, it's important to think about you can't just look at rent, and $1,200 can rent you a 3-bedroom apartment in Western Mass, and I know I can't rent much out east. I get that. But if you put the cost of a car compared to the cost of a T, just think about that as you go through this. Now, we've cut the number of classrooms because that rate, for toddlers rather, because that rate is so, it doesn't even come close to covering the cost of a toddler classroom. Our preschool rate, this is a even bigger difference. So the Region 1 preschool rate is $41.32. The Region 4 is $55. In a preschool classroom of 20, which is what EEC licenses us for, that is $273.60 per classroom difference. $273.60 per classroom per day. If there are 4 preschool classrooms, that's $1,000 a day less today Region 1 is getting than Region 4. Today. This vote increases that gap. It tells us that Region 1 isn't worth investing in by EEC. $1,000 a day for a 4-center classroom. Now let's go back to the $273.60. We have 24-hour labor hours. We have 3 teachers in our classrooms. So if we could give all of our teachers $10 an hour raises with that increase. $10 an hour raises. That's astounding that we could give all of our teachers a $10 an hour increase for the rate that Region 4 gets today compared to the rate Region 1 gets today. So lastly, I need to mention, and the 3.5%, 3.51% I didn't hear about yesterday, so I wasn't sure what the number was, but we have seen increases, and they're statewide increases. The minimum wage increase is statewide. It impacts everybody statewide. It doesn't impact Region 4 more than Region 1. It impacts everybody. We've also seen increases in the family medical leave, paid family medical leave, excuse me. And lastly, and I know this isn't necessarily a state initiative, but I know everybody's feeling the pain of increased health insurance. These are increases that are real, that are coming for us. And I haven't crunched the numbers, I'm not going to lie to you, but the reality is 3.1% is barely going to cover those increases. Never mind thinking about us getting ahead to able to reward our folks. So please rethink the market rate analysis. and think about postponing this a month in a broader context and discussion, because the tiered system that you're put forth for you today is de-incentivizing growth in areas that aren't the regions of the high rates. Thank you. Any questions?
So, quick question.
Sure.
So I'm just trying to understand whether your contention is that all rates should be the same across the state, or whether there should be any differentiation at all.
So I believe they should all be the same, but that's not what I'm here to testify for. I believe that the increase should be the same across the state. And I believe we need to get towards a path, which I don't think is something we could do today or do in the very short term, part of a strategic planning process, where we evaluate what the costs are and what a reasonable salary is for staff and support staff within the centers, and how we could come to terms where what quality is, what quality costs, and how we can move that forward. Today, I just don't want to see the red flag that we're devaluing regions, because the reality is it's hard to continue to sell to my board to invest in a program that loses money when now we're being, it's right there in black and white that if you're not in region one, or I'm sorry, if you're not in upper tier regions, you don't matter as much. And so we're gonna not be able to ever get to a point where we can cover our costs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure we've ever thought of it in those sort of more moral terms, the devaluing and the sort of, you know, the undermining. So I think we need to reframe that we've had from the Fed this guidance around market rate. It is sort of the best tool we have at this point, imperfect as it is. Couldn't agree more that it needs a lot of work. All right, let's move to some of our routine business, which includes approval of minutes from the September 10th meeting. Any amendments? Joan?
On page 7, I have a series of amendments for clarification purposes.
Okay, great.
I can submit them or
Okay.
mention them, but essentially it's paragraph 4, line 3 into 4, striking the words "for the board to answer is to identify."
Okay.
In order to clarify, the
Right.
real question is the intent of the increase in federal funding. And then a couple lines down to strike the words "and a significant portion of responsibilities lays within the agency, but the agency must consider the needs of the field and the impact of CCDBG-related compliance on the field." For clarification, that's not useful. And then further down, she noted that the state chose to invest in increased rates, strike the words "at the workforce." And in the subsequent sentence, it would be helpful to consider the intent at, insert the word "the" federal level.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other corrections? All right. Approved as amended. All in favor? Aye. Abstentions, oppositions? Thank you. Okay, committee update from what we're calling now the program committee. Given that workforce and program seem to be running very tightly together, easier to kind of think about it more in terms of the program. Eleonora?
Thank you. So that was actually the first update, that we had changed the name of the committee after some discussion about whether it really saying it or identifying the committee as workforce was actually representing all the work that we were considering. So we are now going to be called the program committee, and we welcome feedback about that. We met on September 19th, and we spent a significant amount of time actually listening from the commissioner, giving us her perspective about the work ahead of us. We all know that we have been working very, very hard in trying to sort of work in different directions, or appear to be different directions, different topics. And we are now at the juncture where we are going to begin to put everything together to create a significant system that would help us work. So listening to where we are right now and her vision was extremely helpful. And after we spent a good amount of time thinking about that and looking at the current programs, we then received a lot of updates on where we are with the different programs that we have been working on. So at the moment, the kinds of things that we discuss, and I'm happy to go into more detail later, but I don't think that at this moment we are going to be discussing some of the same things that we discussed at the committee level today. But we got an update on the Strong Start quality system, and we talk about standards and supports for educators and for programs. And we spent some time looking at the educator level, meaning looking at core competency, credentials, and support for educators, advancement along career pathways. And then at the program level, looking at licensing regulations, the QRIS standards, and the support for program quality. And we talk about the stages of development and where we were at the moment, what is planning, where are we in early implementation, and then what's coming next. So we spent some time literally looking at QRIS current status and QRIS next steps. Where we are right now, the kinds of piloting that we are beginning to implement, and how that really is part of the whole system that we're going to be looking at as part of the Strong Start program. We spent time talking about credentialing, the credentialing system, the current status of having identified already the core knowledge and competencies, career ladder finalization, the competency measurement framework, and then our next steps, which is to begin to procure a vendor to complete the core knowledge and competencies, the career ladders, and the competency measure framework, and what we need to do in each of those levels. We then look at the online professional development system, the PDS, and where we are. It includes three things: learning management system, the educator registry, and the educator credentialing system. Where we are right now and what our next steps are. We spend time talking about the community college grant, again, current status and next steps, and particularly looking at the next steps and what we need to do as a committee to then bring to the board. We talk about professional development centers, the former EPS, and what these professional development centers are doing, the current status, and our next steps with that. And then we spend time talking about the ECSOs, the Early Childhood Support Organizations, what will make for a program eligibility for to be part of this, and our next steps and looking at it, particularly what we need to do this fall. We talk very briefly about the Early Childhood Mental Health Grant, and we had in the agenda to talk about the Parent, Child, and Family Child Care Grant, but we ran out of time. So we postponed that for our next meeting, which is next week, I think. We did all of this to say that we are spending time. It was an extremely helpful meeting in terms of really listening from the agency about what have we done so far and where we're going to move next, and more importantly than that, how all of these pieces connected. So for the past 2 years, I think we have been talking about independent processes and independent projects, and now we are in the process of seeing the connections between all of them. They are not independent projects anymore. They are part of the big system that the state is building. So today we're going to hear a whole lot more about these same updates, so you will get to hear more details. One last thing that we did talk about is that both the chair and the commissioner already mentioned this, but we have gotten to the deadline, the end of the strategic plan. It was done from 2014 to 2019. And we look very quickly. We haven't done a whole lot of work on that, but we look very quickly. And in terms of strategic planning, there is not a whole lot of update, as we still have the same values and principles that guide our work. But we do have a lot of significant changes for the implementation plan. So we talk about how the last time that we had developed a strategic plan, we had a strategic plan that is the board's vision and guidance, but that the implementation plan is in the hands of the agency. And we agree that that should be the way to continue. They are not necessarily two independent plans, but they are clearly very different, one setting the strategies and the principles, and one setting the actual action plans that will be taken. So I think that we're excited also to take on that work because it will be very helpful to confirm what we believe in, but also to think about where are we now in the process of developing the system that we have been talking for so long. Any questions? Okay, anything to add, Joan, since you were there? Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, and thanks for all your hard work on that committee and for advancing that aspect of the portfolio, which I think is really going very well in a lot of respects. We are going to move now to our agenda items, starting with under the umbrella, the FY20 investments update. We're going to start with some highlights and discussion around the program division.
Good morning. I'm Jocelyn Bound. I'm here with my colleagues from the Programs Division Leadership Team, Gail DeRiggi, Ola Friday, and Amy Whitehead-Plow. And we're happy to provide a brief interlude to the rate reserve discussion by sharing some highlights from the work that we are currently doing in the Programs Division, particularly thinking about the ways in which we're using new funding in FY20 and some of the projects that are underway. And in thinking about the types of projects we're working on, we both have some targeted investments that I'll talk about in a second, but also some investments in building out our state system. So in thinking about some of the examples of targeted investments, we have the early childhood support organizations and the Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative, the ECSOs focusing in on programs that have shown they're ready for very intensive quality improvement efforts, and the common CPPI focusing on high needs communities. We also have 2 different Parent-Child Plus home visiting programs, one focusing on families through the Coordinated Family and Community Engagement Grantees, and one working through family child care systems to work with family child care educators. And I think it's important to note with all of these investments, all of which have a specific focus, they are also either built into larger systems like the Parent-Child Plus work, or are programs that we're developing that could be brought to scale. And then we also are investing directly into our state systems through the Community College Career Pathways Grant, the Professional Development System Centers, which are the revisioning of what was EPS, our online professional development system, which we're very pleased to have up and running, as well as planning for the rollout of the new QRIS. And then we'll go through a little bit more in depth on each of these pieces that we're talking about today. So I think, we have spoken about the ECSOs before. As a reminder, it's a public-private partnership between EEC and New Profit. In FY20, EEC is committing $1 million, and New Profit will be committing $1.8 million over the course of 5 years. That investment will shift over time with EEC picking up the investment. We plan to contract with 4 ECSOs. 3 will focus on working with center-based programs, 1 working with family child care centers through family child care systems. And each of these ECSOs will bring an evidence-based model with targeted training and coaching to interested programs, again, those that have shown the interest in the capacity for really a deep dive into quality development through such intensive supports. They will receive financial incentives, and we will plan an evaluation of these services. The program eligibility specifically focuses on both programs at level 2 or higher that have been actively engaged in the QRIS, and those that are in legal and fiscal good standing, as well as giving priority to programs that are serving high percentages of high needs children. And a brief update on where this stands. I think some of you may know there was a bid that was put out earlier this year. We did not get enough competitive responses, and the decision was made not to award and to return to another bid this fall after an early childhood summit that's planned in October. But we do plan to award 4 ECSOs. Each ECSO is expected to serve 50 classrooms or FCCs, so with a target of serving 200 of these. FY20, because it's a truncated year, will be a planning year, but the expectation that those classrooms will be served in FY21. And then moving on to CPPI. This is up and running. Cohort 1 grantees were awarded last winter. That's Boston, Lowell, New Bedford, North Adams, Somerville, and Springfield. Cohort 2 has just been awarded to Holyoke, Lawrence, and Northampton, bringing us to a total of 9 grantees, supporting 57 classrooms and just under 1,000 children, based either on current enrollment or projected plans for FY20. And as a brief reminder, these grant funds go to communities. They're granted to the public school districts with sub-grantees with EC license programs, and the goal is to build community-level collaborations between those partners, focusing on both improving local access to preschool as well as building quality and alignment across the early childhood system locally.
Just a quick follow-up question on this. So the federal PEG grantees are on this list.
Yep.
Have we seen any drop-off or decline in enrollment in those communities that are now getting state funds rather than federal funds, and the federal funds obviously were larger?
Not in the transition to the state funds. We did in the last year see a drop-off in enrollment statewide, and also heard from some of the public school districts that they were seeing similar declines. So some of
probably more of a demographic issue, right?
But I think where it affects what's happened with the CPPI funds is some of the communities adjusted their numbers to reflect what they expected their enrollment to be.
Jocelyn, just to follow up on that, in FY19, I think we were closer to 1,200 children being served across PEG and CPPI. Does that sound accurate to you? I think we were closer to about 78, 79 classrooms and more kids under PEG plus CPPI.
I would have to go back and look at, because many of the PEG classrooms have been absorbed into that, most of them really into that 57 classrooms, except for some places where reductions were made. And there has been I would have to go back and look at the numbers on that one.
Yeah, the last time I saw it was, I think, something like 78 classrooms and approximately 1,200 students. So we are seeing, for any number of reasons, a decline in kids enrolled in a high-quality pre-K setting. We also have substantially fewer dollars rolling out in FY20 versus FY19 because of the sunset of PEG. So this does seem like a place where there may be opportunity to sustain some of the good work that has happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just trying to process those numbers. And I would have to go back and look, but I think maybe it is an adjustments made between sort of what's continued on from PEG into CPPI. I will say, sorry, Sheila, did you want to? I was just going to say, there's much less state funding. Yeah, so on the state funding side, the idea of the state funding is not that it will fully fund the classrooms the way the PEG program did, but that it will be braided with other funding sources. So to date, what we're seeing in the local communities is they're braiding it with public school funding, obviously with subsidy funding, as well as in some cases charging parents tuition, so sort of thinking about it scaled by tuition, or by income. But it is interesting to note that in the majority of these communities, these are also communities that have benefited from the changes in the Chapter 70 funding formula. So there's an interesting opportunity to think about working with the communities on how that additional funding can support early education locally.
It's going to be important to study.
Always has been.
And then on just the amount of funding, in FY19, we had $5 million, but due to the late start, we didn't spend $2.5 million of it, so that was rolled into FY20, leaving us with $7.5 million to spend this year. Passing it on.
Hi. I'm just going to be talking to you about two initiatives that really are enhancing existing systems. And the first one I'm so happy to talk about is one that's directly impacting families through our network of coordinated family and community engagement grantees. This is a grant for $600,000 for the Parent-Child Plus program, formerly known as the Parent-Child Home program. And with this additional funding, we're hoping to serve 208 families. We have 34 coordinated family and community engagement grantees that already offer the Parent-Child Plus model. With this additional funding, 12 of those 34 will expand their programming, and 5 will be brand new to the CFCEs that have not offered it in the past. One of the benefits of having this program embedded in our network is the opportunity for participants who are, as you can see from the description of the kinds of families being served, face numerous challenges, so that they have the support of the broader CFC network before during and after their 2-year involvement with the PC Plus program, but in addition, make social connections or connected to other resources, and then have these intensive home visits over a 2-year period. So we're very excited about enhancing that capacity within the family and community supports network that we have. Another piece, Parent-Child Plus Family Child Care opportunity, is happening directed at early education and care educators in the family child care setting. This is something new for us, and it's something that's evolved through the National Parent-Child Plus. I just have to say, I always said Parent-Child Home for 14 years, so I'm just tripping over it. And I'm not supposed to say PC Plus, so I'm just working on that too. So the Parent-Child Plus model that's now being offered to family child care educators is a partnership between the Parent-Child Plus replication sites in Massachusetts. There's 37 sites in the state, and all of them were eligible to apply for this grant. 5 of them did and are working in partnership with family child care systems on a variety of levels. One is to really think about how they're engaging with the family child care system staff and recruiting and training early educators in their systems to be able to offer this model. And we're looking at this as possibly something that we might be able to grow in the future, depending on the outcomes that we see, if this strengthens systems, and thinking about where we will take this model. But it is very new for us, and we are exploring those options. It's currently being offered in regions 1, 2, and 6. Did you want to say more about that?
No.
Okay. Okay. And the number of educators that are benefiting are currently 40 family child care educators. I don't know if anybody has questions about these. Yeah.
I just wondered why so few applied.
Yeah, that's something that we're looking at too. I think that this program is built on top of the 37 replication sites that have been offering the core model for years. So I think some are thinking about whether they want to consider branching out into also providing, which is really educator professional development. So, but that is something that we're looking at too, to how is it an incentive for people to participate, and will we get the outcomes that we would want ultimately to be able to think about taking this to a larger scale. But it's a very small pot of money, but we're just putting our toe in the water on this at this point.
Sorry, I just quickly wanted to follow up to your question, Joan. I realized what I forgot to mention. Sorry, it was really driving me crazy. I did not mention that in those numbers is not included Boston's significant investment in UPK and in sustaining the vast majority of their PEG programs. So I think it's just important to keep that piece in mind too.
Good, thanks.
Oh,
Can I just
Sure.
think out loud a little bit?
Yes.
It's interesting, I think, that the family child care systems
Right.
are doing this as a system. They're also, systems are also involved in some other initiatives.
Right.
And I think it might be interesting, and I don't even know the question to ask yet, but how would those systems that are involved in some of our programs, and Ola's gonna get to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to do a nice warm handoff right here. Yeah,
But
yeah,
how,
yeah.
quality is being impacted, and are we following the
Yeah.
kiddos on that to see? Okay, I'll wait.
Thanks, Joni. No, for sure, we are definitely looking at the role of systems not only in this Parent-Child Plus work, but across the board in terms of how they're supporting our workforce, and then what's the role of the agency in working with systems and supporting them to do even more. And so that's something very front and center on our minds. One of the systems, as you know, is one of our professional development centers, which I will get to in a minute. But first, I'm clicking too. I gotta navigate. Oh, thanks, Amy. All right, so first, just moving on to what we're framing as our systems buildings initiatives. I wanted to talk a bit about our work with the community colleges. You might remember that last fiscal year we got a significant state investment to partner with our public community colleges in support of the workforce. And so we've been engaging with all 15 of them to think about promoting and expanding access to higher education for those in our workforce, and really thinking expansively about who can be a successful college student. And so really thinking about how do we support folks with no or limited college experience. Many of our educators, as you know, are teacher certified. They might have one child growth and development course. And so how do we really engage folks like that and to really align them to certificate programs and ultimately the AA and the BA as well? To do that, we're really focusing a lot on the supports to support educators to access and complete higher education. So everything from how do you get to campus or locating courses off campus at work sites, thinking about coursework or coaching in languages other than English, thinking about developmental education, co-requisites. So we're really thinking very expansively about the supports that were provided. And of course, also setting the stage for a very clear pathway from the certificate programs to the AA and to articulation agreements with our four-year institutions as well. In terms of what the colleges have been doing, they spent last year really planning. Last year was a truncated year for us. We got started in about March, so that's why we have a balance there from last year. So right now we're at a $12.9 million investment because there was a 2.9 balance from last year because we got started so late. But last year was very much a planning stage. The colleges engaged in what we called an industry assessment. So they went out to the field and gathered information about the needs of the workforce and interests in taking higher education courses, and also got some better understandings about what some of the barriers were that were preventing folks from attaining college courses. And then they also spent some time planning their CDA Plus program models. So you might remember that a big emphasis of this work is to implement a credit-bearing CDA program in all of our public community colleges. 3 of them had existing CDA programs already, but we've been working with them to make those even more robust and to put a lot of those wraparound supports in place as well. So all of our campuses now do have CDA Plus programs of study in place. They spent last year designing those, thinking about the courses that they had that would align to that program of study, and in some instances also had to put together new courses to fill any gaps to make sure that they were meeting the national CDA competencies and subject area requirements. So we're really excited that we do have a statewide 9-credit bearing CDA model across all of our campuses. They articulate to the AA and also will cross-articulate to every campus. And as a result, our educators will also not only qualify for lead teacher certification, but also qualify for the national CDA credential as well. That's recognized in every state and territory.
Sorry, go ahead, John. I was going to ask a quick follow-up question. You talked about articulation to every campus. That's every community college campus, but is it also to every four-year public campus as well?
So yes, firstly to the public community colleges, we have a lot of work to make sure that the CDAs would also articulate to our four-year institutions. That's another piece of the work.
I was going to ask that question as
Brilliant
well,
question.
but and there were no B's in it, no B's or P's. My other question is, did you say, Ola, that all the courses are 9 credits, consistent across the community colleges? Because we've been working on this forever, and it's been so inconsistent, so it's very exciting.
Well, we're still working on it. So
It's always been an issue.
yeah, no, and it still remains one that we're wrestling with the colleges to do that work around it's really about the transcription of the courses. So we're looking at how are you, College A, transcripting your courses that are aligned to your CDA Plus programs, and you, College B, and then doing that mapping. But the expectation is that will occur, that for at least 9 credits, you will obtain at least 9 credits at every other institution. You could obtain more, but at least 9.
And that's part of the conundrum in transferring to a 4-year school. Is that piece. So,
Yes, you're welcome. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. So moving on to our other state systems building efforts. So Our professional development centers, as was mentioned before, these are the new, essentially, educator provider support networks. So we still have a statewide regional networks of training and technical assistance supports. You see the funding level here. What's significantly new this year and in this work is that now we're partnering with UMass Boston to be a statewide partner really in this work with us in developing and managing what are our 5 regional professional development centers. So UMass Boston is playing a significant leadership role in that work and also partnering with the agency as we really think about building out and further developing a statewide system of especially technical assistance supports with a strong emphasis on coaching. So the regional PDCs, there are 5. They're aligned currently to our licensing regions in the state, so that connection is there. We've been doing a lot of communication with our regional offices because we know that that's a very strong resource and partnership for them. Specifically, the PDCs are required to provide sort of 3 main buckets of services. So firstly, ECE system navigation, this idea of routing educators, administrators to available resources and supports in their communities, certainly working with the regional offices to do that work, steering folks to the career pathways community colleges, for an example, and other resources as well. They're also significantly providing technical assistance and training opportunities. We are really, really excited to be building out a tier level of technical assistance supports for our workforce and really calling out the ways that we're supporting consultation, access to professional learning communities, and significantly leadership coaching as well. That's work that will really be rolling out early next year. We're in the design and development phase right now with UMass Boston around that. And as I mentioned before, a significant emphasis on leadership coaching. We know that much of the work that drives program quality really sits with our leaders in programs, and we have to really support them in doing that very hard work. And so we're being very intentional about what that means for us as a system and building in those supports as well. And certainly aligning those to licensing compliance and QRS goals. So, let's see. Any questions about the PDCs? Okay. All right. Moving on to, I think what's our sort of shining star, the online professional development system. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from the field that folks are joining the system. We actually have 45,000 users already in the system to date, and 96% of them are enrolled in the EEC Essentials course package to meet the federal requirements. So everyone knows that the online training component or the learning management system is available. So we have those folks on there already. They're engaging in that online training. In the coming months, years, we will be putting much more content out on the learning management system. So that's a big piece of work for us to think about course development, what those areas are, and so we have some resources this year to continue to build content and also to acquire existing good content that's out there. So we're really excited to build out the catalog that's available on the learning management system very shortly. You might remember that there are 2 other main components of the online professional development system. So not only the learning management piece, but this will also be our new registry for the field. And I get applause when I say that because folks are, maybe not from you guys, but from the field. I wasn't reaching for applause. Just a little. But everyone is really, really excited to have an integrated registry that will be tracking training registration. It's going to be so robust and integrated with the other pieces as well. So that's the second phase that's in development as we speak. And then the third component of the online professional development system will be our educator credentialing system. So you know that we have the TQ system. It's antiquated, but it does its job, but we have to replace TQ. And so this will be the replacement for TQ. As we also look to...
Can you just say what TQ is for people who don't know?
Sorry. The teacher qualifications system, which is the information technology solution that we use to certify our workforce. Yes. Thank you. You're welcome. And so we're looking to redesign both the certification requirements and also the IT solution that supports that requirement. And so this will be that new IT solution. Okay. Yeah, any questions about that? All right.
Thank you. And so last but not least, talking a little bit about QRIS. You've heard already from our commissioner that a lot of the conversation a little bit later in this meeting will focus on strategic action planning, and that's where you'll begin to see the QRIS really come to life and become operationalized. So we will be looking to the upcoming strategic action planning process to consider things like staff needs and technology needs for the revised quality rating and improvement system, and then also to consider the ways in which we'll be communicating about this and preparing the field for this great transition to come. And so that is it from us, unless there are questions for any of us. All righty.
Oh, exciting. Something's coming.
So this is a question that I kind of have that rub with between who we're servicing and who we're not prioritizing. And I'm just looking from a public school perspective, how public schools can maintain some connection to EEC. And I'm wondering, you know, I'm thinking as we talk about content, Ola, of some of these online courses, we might be able to touch on the pieces that I think have been missing, like inclusive practices, dual language learners, family engagement. That's a little self-serving, but that would be something. Because I feel that folks in the field are not getting those pieces. I know because we have to upfront some other pieces, but those 2 or 3 areas are significantly missing. And I think community-based programs look towards the public school to fulfill that need, and yet we're a mixed delivery system, and we have the CPPI and the old PEG grant looking at models of collaboration. I'm also thinking of the leadership coaching and wondering if public school principals might be part of that cohort. I don't know if they are, but it might be something to consider. And I know that there are some other sister agencies are looking at principals as leaders and looking at that. My last question is, did you say 45,000 educators in the registry? How many of those are public school teachers?
Yeah. So it's 45,000 users. They're not all necessarily educators, because right now anyone can access the registry, the PDS system. And also right now we're not tracking roles, so we're not able to say what's the role of any one user in the current system. Right now we're in the process of being able to bring in that level of information. Yeah.
I ask those questions just because I want to be able to make sure that we continue to have a robust mixed delivery system. And by including public school in our initiatives, whether directly or indirectly, I think it would support that. So thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's great, really great update. Okay, we'll return now to this agenda item around the rate reserve. We will certainly have a discussion, and we will decide as to whether it makes sense to vote or whether there's reason to delay. And so I just want to emphasize that at this moment, I think the critical move is to have a strong discussion and get a better sense of where we all stand and feel as a board and go from there. I have some ideas about how and whether we may move forward, and we can talk more about that after a discussion.
So I'm going to start and give a little bit of background on this before we get into the specifics of the proposal. Make sure that we all have at least what I have been able to gather in the short time I've been here of what we're looking at in terms of the point we are today. So I think it's really important to just lay the context for those who may be a little bit less familiar with the way that the system works. The subsidy rates that we put out into the field are the funding that agencies get for serving low-income working families and that are subsidized by the federal government and state dollars that we put out to the field on a daily rate for children. They are done at you have all of the board members all have the information in front of them, but for those of you who may be less familiar, they are done at an age level and a regional level based on a number of different factors and historical context, which you all probably know better than I do since I am just learning about that, but that has put us at the point we are today in terms of the differentiation of rates across regions and age levels that we are working from. The legislature, over the summer when I was here for approximately 1 second, did actually pass a budget. You have the budget language in front of you, which we did pass out as a request based on the earlier requests and the earlier comments. You have the legislative language that aligned with that budget, along with the historical legislative language that has been put over the last few years on this. This investment this year is actually builds on what ends up being about over $127 million investment into increasing rates because the rates over the last few years, because the rates are the primary source of income for many child care agencies, although you heard through our program team a number of different supports and a different investments we make in supporting agencies. This is the primary source of funding from us. Obviously, increasing those rates and allowing agencies to have the funding to serve families and children in a high quality manner is a key priority. This funding is specifically targeted to increasing the rates, but obviously not the only funding that we put into that subsidy. I wanted to also take one step back that in addition to the legislative language that provided additional funding for the rates, we also have been working, as I mentioned, with the federal government to look at what their requirements would be as they have passed the 2014 regulation change and have pushed out a vision for increasing quality of child care that they're funding as well. You have in front of you the guidance we got in February 2019. So those of you who have seen this and have been part of this much longer than I have, I just wanted to ground us all on what we got from the feds in February of 2019 that has required us to look and using that market rate survey to really effectively drive a conversation around how we differentiate rates across our regions. I want to call out two quick elements of that. One on the second page of the letter. I'll read this. You don't have to follow along, and I'm happy to provide it to everyone as have more conversation around this. But the second half of that letter does explicitly say this was a letter that we received in terms of making sure everyone in our system was at the 25th percentile of that market rate survey. Also gave us the guidance of how they would look at this going forward, which states, Office of Child Care recognizes that given budgets and other constraints, states with very low rates cannot meet the 75th percentile benchmark immediately. The 75th percentile is what was laid out in federal regulation as the goal for public subsidy rates. Continuing, in order to come into compliance for the CCDF plan cycle, that's our state plan for our child care funds, the Office of Child Care is requiring states with very low rates to raise these rates to at least the 25th percentile. That was what we did in accordance with this letter. However, the 25th percentile is not to be viewed as a benchmark or a long-term solution to gauge equal access and will not be sufficient for compliance in future plan cycles, which is the reality we are entering in right now, this being the future plan cycle. You will notice in the other documents from the feds that there is flexibility in using different metrics to identify a market rate. However, coming into the department at the time that I did, the only measure that we have available is this 2018 market rate survey that the team and the field worked very hard on last year. And so that is the measure that we are being held accountable to, the measure that they are telling us to use to get to that 75th rate percentile in our rates across the board. I wanted to give that guidance, and I wanted to place us in the multiple stakeholders that we are responsible to accommodating, and say that while we absolutely tried to do, or I will take full responsibility, tried to do some engagement on this in a short time, the urgency of getting these funds out to the field was paramount for us. As you heard from the program team, it is very easy in a bureaucracy to have things get caught up in steps, this being the first of multiple steps that the department has to go to actually make sure that rate, that increase in funding makes it to the field in a timely manner, and the urgency to be able to make sure that agencies are able to actually receive these dollars not in March or April, but actually now, retroactive to July 1st, was a compounding pressure that we were feeling, or that the urgency that I was putting on the team as well. I wanted to take this time just essentially to set the frame as you're going to hear about the specific proposal in front of us, make sure that we all understood the compounding factors that we were dealing with, and that we are really trying to co-create this. I also really want to highlight that our next agenda item will be about this co-creation of a better metric as part of a larger strategic planning. We are absolutely committed to that. The leadership team has been engaged in starting to think about what a work plan looks like around that, and that will be a piece of this roadmap that we are absolutely committed to doing before we hopefully confront this issue again of how we get more money into the field next year in partnership with the administration and the legislature. Now, Carol and Sean, thank you for taking us through the specifics of the proposal today.
Good morning, and thank you to the Commissioner for stealing my thunder and all the framing of it. So I'm just going to do a quick background in interest of time, move on to sort of the meat of the proposal with Carol. I just want to echo the fact that the Commissioner, it's true, this is a reserve that the legislature passed and Governor Baker has signed into law for the past couple of years. And among the requirements for language is, as you can see before you, is an appropriate increase. What has changed this year, and as the Commissioner detailed, was the federal guidance back in February. As you recall, they mandated that all states get within the 25th percentile, and that's what the board voted on back in May. The other part of that letter was not so much as guidance as I look as a warning that shouldn't be looked as the benchmark. It's only going to go up, and they were pretty strong in that terminology with us over the phone. So balancing that guidance and how we always want to provide everyone an increase, we came up with this proposal that Carol's now going to detail the components of that proposal right now.
Okay. Okay, so I'm the details person today. So first, real quick, the line item language that you see in front of me. I can actually start to change the slides. 3 key points we want to make from the line item language with this rate reserve of $20 million. So funds are required to go to a rate increase for center-based providers. The increase must impact all providers. And we also must use funds to increase the daily add-on rate for services for children with active cases with the Department of Children and Families. While the language only requires the add-on rate for DCF contracts, we would also like to increase the add-on rate for homeless and teen contract providers to keep those rates the same, similar to what we did last year. So moving on to the real details. So we do propose a 3-tiered approach to the rate reserve this fiscal year. So the first and largest section of this is the 3.52% across the board rate increase to all center-based providers and the FCC system admin rate. The same percentage increase will be applied to all age groups and regions. This takes up about 77% of the rate reserve funds, or about $15.4 million. And after that, increase the 17 center-based rates that are below the 30th percentile from that 2018 market rate survey to be equal to the 30th percentile rate. This uses about 14% of the rate reserve funds, which is about $2.8 million. Lastly, a 78-cent increase to that daily add-on rate, bringing it from $18.22 to $19 per day. This uses about 9% of the rate reserve funds, or $1.8 million. All of this, again, is based on the guidance you have heard from the Administration for Children and Families, and that need to balance this federal mandate with the legislative direction to increase rates for all providers. As was mentioned, once we implement, all of these rates will be retroactive to July 1st, with a retro payment in that first month of billing after the increase is implemented.
And I just want to highlight that this was a balance of identifying the 30th percentile as the next achievable mark to show the feds that we were paying attention to the differentiation we were instructed to without being overly zealous, without a perfect tool. So obviously, as I mentioned, we want to build out a tool that provides us an alternative to an imperfect market rate survey, which have depressed rates across the board and for a number of different reasons, as you heard in public comments. So we were trying to identify the nominal amount of increase we could show the feds while also prioritizing that universal increase. I also want to highlight something else that you won't get in the next level of details, is that should we decide not to include that 30th percentile, the net rate would be just over 4% of the increase across the board. And so we're looking at that as the differential because of the instruction of the add-on rate and the how we'd applied that to not only our DCF cases, those children who are in foster care who are placed in our programs, but also the children who are being served who are homeless or teen parents. We are explicitly giving programs more money to serve those children, and so that is the differential that it would be if we opted not to include that 30th percentile.
Great, thanks everybody. So let's aim for a discussion here and get a sense of how people feel about this. I'll make a few comments just in the interest of moving us along and sort of putting some ideas out there. First, I want to underscore my full and total support for moving forward on the source of the issue, which is actually how much does quality cost? How much should we be spending? What's the tool that we ought to be using? For now, we have the market rate, but I totally appreciate the need for real strategic work in that domain. So I think we will, and I'm sure we can all agree to some extent. The second point that I'd like to make is that it is never my choice to hold off on funds to go out to the field. That I think we need to do that. If we are going to delay, we need a very good reason for why we need the 30 days to get to something that is materially better than the recommendation that is before us. I am one person at this board. That is my personal view. The third point I'd like to make is that if we did go forward with a vote and put the money out to the field, which of course I would like to do, I do think that it's worth a discussion about this issue of precedent and how to use these rate reserve funds. I think that's something that's bubbling up and something worth a discussion. Whether it ties up the funds today, I think is an open question and needs to be considered carefully. So those are my thoughts to sort of start us off on a discussion about this. Thank you.
I think we heard a number of really important points raised in public comment. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that they're heard loud and clear. I mean, I think that, part of what came forward is really a question about sort of process and communications and engagement of the field in a way that, really treats everyone as partners at the table in this work. I think we heard a lot about the very real pressures of, low wages and the impact of that on folks who are working in programs. And we heard a really important piece about how sort of inaccurate the market rate study is. We're all very sensitive to that, and we know that it effectively, EEC rates can sometimes define the marketplace in communities where there are not as many providers, and that we have a special responsibility, I think, to understand that in a more nuanced way, and that there are, real disconnects between the cost of quality, what it is that we're expecting of programs, and what it is that we provide in terms of investment. All of those things are real, and I think that we're also hearing loud and clear from the commissioner that all of these things are understood and are on the table for the meaningful work going forward. And so I think with an eye on getting money out to the field in a way that affords an increase to everyone, albeit not as much of an increase as we would ideally like to provide, but one that would only be about 0.5% off if otherwise allocated, feels like the right move, because I don't think that we would substantively make a change over the course of a delay.
So I would agree that, you know, always we would like to pay people more money, especially for the incredible work that they do for our children. I think it's incredibly important work and one that deserves a much higher wage. But we also have to deal within fiscal constraints and budgets. And I think that the proposal put forth, quite honestly, my straight up read is that it's very equitable, right? And I'm not going to be I'm not going to be able to withhold funds, particularly from the field overall, but also for our special populations that are getting this subsidy, without understanding sort of why that shouldn't be the case. And so far, I haven't heard that. And yes, I understand that maybe the rate reimbursement was applied differently in the past, and that sort of, you know, some people have been operating under an assumption. But we know what the legislative language says, and it says an appropriate percentage. So I think trying to balance and bring some equity to the process by bringing those areas that were not at 30% to that 30%, it also creates a more, you know, consistent foundation to then try to move it off 30% into 35%. And so, I mean, I just think that there's always going to be more discussions. There's always going to be opportunities to do things better and to change things in terms of, you know, funding allocations. But I think that I'd like to see people get the money that is available, and in a way that presents an equitable plan.
I think one good, wonderful outcome of this is there's general recognition that the market rate is not a good instrument on which to base distribution of funds, and I appreciate the commissioner and her commitment to moving ahead and making some changes in that. But I also want to mention that many providers work very hard over the year to reach out to their legislators, to invite them in, to support them even financially in whatever small way they can, and then to achieve this rate reserve funding. And they feel very proud that they have done that. And I think they deserve probably more input than we've given them this time in how that is distributed. And I think I heard the chairman say that going forward that might be the case, and I would certainly urge people to think about that in the future, because they have strong relationships with the legislature and they've done a great job in that effort.
Yes, Madam Chairperson.
Thanks, Dave. Go ahead. Thank you.
I would like to get a clarification on the motion. Are we about to vote on these three proposals in unison, or are we voting in each one of these separately?
Thanks, Dave. They are bundled into one motion. The three-part structure, if you will, is baked into one motion. And it'll take, how long will it take to get the money out to the field? It takes a couple months.
It'll take, you said 6 to 8 weeks total?
Yeah, we have some contract amendments that are in process that we need to let complete through the full contract amendment before we can start moving on the rate increase.
And those are wrapping up, so we should be, it's about a 6 to 8 week process from here is our anticipated.
Make sure Sandy's still standing.
Yeah.
Dave, anything else that you wanted to raise?
No, I would just want to be clear on whether or not we were voting as a bundle, or whether
Yeah.
we're voting each of these items separately.
Others want to weigh in on sort of where we're at given this discussion? Joni.
I'm certainly in support of supporting the field as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. And I think as the commissioner works on the strategic action plan, these things will come into consideration. I think it's as we do for our educators, a continuous quality improvement piece. But if we can support our educators, I'm supporting that.
Thank you, Joni. Anybody else?
I'm sure just one
Yep.
additional comment. So I think, first of all, there's a sort of a basic principle around whether rates should be differentiated at all. And notwithstanding some of the comments we've heard, I think they should be based on different regions and different market contexts. We obviously don't have the perfect instrument for doing that. And so if we were saying, well, we want to move, some providers up from 50% to 55% to close the gap so it's, or to make them all identical, I think that would be a fool's errand because we don't have that much precision in the instrument. But we're talking about a gap from 25% to almost 75%. There's clearly directionally some real gap in the marketplace that we need to address. And I think this incrementally moves it in the right direction without going overboard and believing and causing us to rely on a measure more than it's worth. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that there was some reference made to other funds that we could bring in order to address this. And the problem here is that when you increase rates in one year, that needs to be baked into the caseload account in the next year. And unless we are confident that any funds that we expend in this year can be fully incorporated into next year's line item for the caseload account, we'll be essentially trading off rates for access. And that's, I think what we're all agreed we don't want to do. So I think this is the pool of resources that we have. The pattern, well established, is that these funds are then baked into next year's maintenance line item for the caseload account, and therefore, if we're going to make any move at all, it needs to be with these funds.
So, with a clear sense among us that there are a number of issues that surfaced as part of this discussion for work going forward, partnership, further input process in that regard, but especially this notion of getting to something where we feel more confident, a little more precision, a little more quality, closer to the quality on the ground that ties into some of the program and workforce work we've been doing. With all of that said, I do think it makes sense to call a vote at this time, given this discussion, and continue to move this forward. So I want to make the motion that the Board of Early Education and Care hereby approves the department's recommended increase of $0.82 per day to the add-on rate paid on homeless, supportive, and teen parent contracts. Increase to all reimbursement rates paid to center-based in each region and program type in varying percentages to effectuate an increase to the reimbursement rate to attain the 30th percentile as determined by the 2018 market rate study effective July 1, 2019, as presented at the board meeting of May 14th, 2019, and an increase of 3.52% to the reimbursement rates paid to center-based programs and admin rates paid to family child care systems providing subsidized early education and care services as presented at the board meeting of October 8, 2019. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Abstained?
I thought I would be able to make a motion based on yours. Is there just no discussion after that? I'm sorry.
Oh, sure.
Okay. So I'd like, given the concern from the field over the use of the market-based criteria to distribute rate reserve funding, I would like to make the motion to table the vote on the rate reserve until next month so that child care advocates in the field have an opportunity to work out their concerns with both the administration and the legislature.
Is there a second?
Is there a second on that motion? I'm sorry, Sheila, I missed that in the step.
Okay.
Is there a second on that motion? Okay. What am I doing in process? Should I restate this motion? Are we okay? Okay. So motion carries. First motion carries. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Abstained? Opposed? One opposed. Okay. Thank you very much.
Did we get Dave's vote?
Dave was a yes on the first round.
Just want to record him.
Thank you. Thanks, Carolyn. Okay. So I certainly also don't think that precludes some debriefing and further discussion about this particular process, but I'm also pleased to get the money out to the field as soon as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add that, I mean, obviously I respect the positions that were provided to us during public comment, and that I'm sorry if communications were not as good as they could have been. Obviously, we strive to have the most open and transparent communications as possible throughout, and so to the extent that people were surprised by the outcome, then I'm sorry for that, and that gives us an opportunity to do better.
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
And I think we all commit to that.
I agree, and I think we've certainly had a long history of partnership. I know the new commissioner feels strongly about partnerships with the field, and we will all learn from this and continue to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody for this work and their thoughts. Thank you, Sean and Carol. Okay, it remains a very good segue to the commissioner's final agenda item, which is about the strategic planning and that roadmap. Allison, I know you have to depart, so thank you very much.
Hi, how are you? I know, I switched positions. It's so I think this is exactly, I'm building on what Sheila said, is really building some robust collaboration around how we build alternative tools is the vision for the strategic action planning process. So we'll definitely discuss a little bit about that process and where we anticipate it going. But wanted to start, I think, as Eleonora highlighted when we were talking about the program committee, was really starting with some of the background foundation we're building from here as we enter into the process. So I referenced last time in my comments around how we would be looking at engagement and strategic planning, and this is the update from that. So I'm building from where the strategic plan existed. Oh, sorry, should sit back there where. Today we'll look through the background foundation with the strategic plan we're currently functioning under and what it looks like to transition that to, as Eleonora said, an implementation plan. The strategic plan as it existed did highlight the need for an implementation plan, and I think that's the opportunity we have in front of us is thinking directly about how we operationalize the vision and goal that the board has set. We'll also look at a little bit about what I have been hearing from around the community. As I said, I've been to every region, talked to a number of providers, still getting very much oriented as quickly as possible to a very complex landscape, but trying to hear themes and trends across the regions that we might be able to use, and then looking at to set priorities as we look ahead and think about what we actually do in terms of a process for strategic action planning. So I know you all have seen this, and I certainly don't want to belabor it, but I wanted to set some conversation around what the existing mission and vision is for the department, set by the board in 2014, still under consideration as we are in 2019, but expiring this year, and offers the opportunity to think about what do we want to do going forward in terms of setting strategic direction. The mission, you can read it in front of you, but really does talk about the goal for the field, for the Commonwealth around early education and care, highlighting that we want to create early education as an opportunity to build lifelong learners, lifelong community members, and really thinking about children in the context of their family and caregiver. The vision, which I did not detail in front of you here, but the vision then consists of 9 bullet points that are aspirations for the department's role in actually achieving that mission. It looks at the role in supporting caregivers, the role of supporting the workforce, and in building stability, partnering with sister agencies. Again, the high-level vision that you would really want to ensure a department like EEC is doing to achieve that mission. That the goal, again, breezing through this because many of you were involved in the creation of it, so you know it better than I do. But the 5-year goals then flow from those 2, mission and vision, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this because this is where we wanted to focus on looking at how the implementation and operationalization of this would occur. So the 5-year goals focusing on all children having access to early childhood, being ready to enter K-12 system, meaning that they and their families will be provided with the opportunity to support children's whole child development, which you have listed in domains there. It also focuses, the goals then look at the program's role in being able to, in the department's role in being able to license and support quality in programs, ensuring that they are ready to not only deal with health and safety for children, but also provide high quality opportunities that we know set up children to thrive. The next goal then looks at the workforce specifically and the role of that adult in the program who is engaging with children and families and making sure that they are have the supports they need both professionally and through compensation and provide pathways for a workforce that looks like the communities we serve to actually enter the classroom and or the program and be sustained there. Finally, it looks at the department's role. I think that there is some room for continued conversation around this about how much do we really call out some of the department's role in moving the field and not just our and partnering with the field. And again, to build on Sheila's point of really thinking it's not just the department's leadership, but it's the department's collaboration that is equally as important to moving forward. I think some of that is probably the intention that many of you may have created with the integrity, transparency, and accountability to the people of the Commonwealth, but I think there's also room to discuss that in terms of partnership as well. So I start there because and I'll go next slide, sorry, then takes these 5 goals and looks at 4 principles around these objectives within these 5 goals. The commitment to quality, increasing access, continued communications, advocacy, and really building a sustainable infrastructure and finance. You all have access to the strategic plan. We can resend it if you're interested. The question I have as we've been thinking about the next steps is really how much do we need to revisit these goals and mission given the fact that this is what's good for the field and how much are we using that as a foundation to move to the next step in a really substantive way. I put that not for discussion right yet, but as we look forward to the next, the proposed path forward here, I wanted to highlight that it really does build from the same sort of foundational principles as the existing strategic plan does that would allow us to really think, as Eleonora highlighted, about the actionable steps, strategies, and measurable impact we intend to have if we are doing our job on this mission and vision. Okay, so when we talk about learnings to date, so as I said, I have very actively tried to get caught up with the numerous advisory bodies and work groups that this department is engaged in. I must admit that I am still learning the names and acronyms around some of them, and so I will detail as many as I can as we go forward, but also really understanding that there's a diverse stakeholders in early childhood and trying to really dig into making sure that I have had an opportunity to understand not only through the lens of the department, but through meetings directly with the individuals and agencies as quickly as possible. That said, there's also only so many hours in a day, and so it's still very much in process and still very much trying to continue to get that feedback while allowing us to move forward as quickly as possible on key decisions, knowing that we are into a program year and programs are working hard to make sure that they're sustainable on the ground as well. So here's what I'm hearing, some things I'm hearing from the field that I think are worth noting. I think as we look at the next steps and how we operationalize the mission and vision, these themes are relevant questions for us to be asking ourselves about not only what the work is, how the strategies coalesce around achieving these goals, but also in how we organize ourselves to achieve those strategies as a department. So really looking at the distribution of responsibilities across a regional office and the central office and thinking about what programs need and how accessible that needs to be to really be able to support not only the health and safety foundation, but that as a part of a continuum of quality for programs across the spectrum, not only in our mixed delivery out of home care, but also for our family and community engagement partners and a number of other other funding that we push out into the field that then supports the variety of services that families need. Thinking about how accessible and how cohesive that is at the local level is a really key question that keeps coming up. How we can how programs in the field can easily access the suite of resources they need from EEC. It begs the question of how we think about pushing as much as possible as close to the field, so it is really about supporting the program's role in supporting children and families. The second theme that I have heard consistently is really about the department's role in tracking progress, not only ensuring, as you've heard here, you heard from the programs team, we've heard through a number of different conversations I've already had with many of you, is that we have a number of new initiatives and new way of thinking about how we really take what we know works and turn it into what we do on the ground. That said, a lot of those new things, including building on foundations of programs that have been existing for a number of years, have really offered the opportunity to think about what impact are we trying to have in the field, and the department's role not only of our own work, but how that fits into the landscape of services that are being delivered and fundraised for and provided in the field. How we can ensure that our implementation is effective by providing measurable benchmarks and tracking progress for children and families, not just process. Thirdly, when we talk about, again, going back to Sheila's point around building meaningful feedback loops. So as I said, really understand, as I said, I've been engaging and really trying to understand the variety of different places where feedback loops could occur, but think there's obviously consistent room for improvement to make sure that we are really meeting those in a collaborative fashion, and thinking about what decisions over the calendar year may need to be decided, so we're building in the right feedback loops with those groups across the year in a consistent basis. Finally, the last two kind of work together is really thinking about how we support alignment both across our own initiatives, but also see those initiatives in conjunction with the variety of investments that the Commonwealth is making through other agencies as well, and also as programs and communities design their own implementation plans for other funding or other strategies, that EEC is really supportive of integrating into a broader landscape as well. So making sure that we are not only coordinated, but also ensuring that coordination lends us to being able to measure impact for children and families at the field level. I'm going to pause here before we go on to looking ahead and just make sure that based on what you've heard, everyone understands there's no questions from what I'm hearing or what I'm looking at. Yeah.
I just wanted to be hopeful that when we talk about alignment, we were also talking, beat on Joni's drum, about K-12 education.
Absolutely.
You know, really what we all want is for our children to be successful when they get to that point. So it seems we operate in such separate spheres.
Absolutely.
I'd love to think a lot about that.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that, yes, and certainly very intentionally calling out not only the horizontal alignment but the vertical alignment for families and children is essential, and something that consistently comes up as a both and scenario in every conversation.
When you say provide leadership to track progress in the field and ensure effective implementation, to what extent does that overlap with QRIS, and to what extent is that something different than what you're
absolutely
what you're envisioning?
Yeah, no, absolutely. QRIS, I think, is a key component of that. I think what I'm hearing there is the QRIS is first of all, an opportunity for us to think about the conceptualization into operationalization, right? A ton of work has gone into designing a QRIS system that tracks to research, is impactful for programs. the devil's in the details of what we do with this now, right? What information do we how do people actually submit information to us is going to be the real bureaucratic work ahead of saying, all right, it's not just what you have to verify, but what counts as that verification? Do you submit electronically? Do I have to drive it to Boston, right? Those kind of things are what leads programs time. So I think what that particular bullet point encompasses QRIS, but encompasses us to then also say, how are we tracking progress in QRIS? Is it enough to just say who is getting the star level, or are we saying how quickly they're getting the star level so we know what barriers we may set up in their way and are looking at that too? So it's really about thinking about the metrics we should be holding ourselves to, in QRIS included, that will drive really how we ensure implementation is not only conceptual but actually playing out the way we intended on the ground.
Longitudinal study
Absolutely.
to look at that. Right.
Yeah, I think particularly if we look at child outcomes around that, absolutely we need longitudinal study. I think that there are some quick wins on this, right, of if we see a lot and been talking a lot with the programs team around some of the operationalizing what we know from research into the ground. There's some real just like, okay, well, do you submit things electronically or paper copy, or do you want, do you upload them, or do you have to email them to someone that might provide even quicker wins that we wouldn't need a longitudinal study for. We would just need some both qualitative data and some tracking of time frames.
One piece that I don't know if it's worth including, but the importance of partnerships. And I was beginning to think about the importance of partnerships between our field and higher education in particular, but it's not exclusive to higher education in general, because when you're talking here about aligning strategies across state agencies, you're talking about strategies, and I'm thinking more the implementation of activities that goes beyond the strategies.
Yep.
And the positioning of the agency in partnership with other institutions and agencies across the state that could actually really support the field and the children and the families that we work for.
Absolutely.
So I wonder if that's somewhere here. I was trying not to add more things.
Yep.
But I cannot put it in any of the existing ones. So
Absolutely.
that's a
I think much
suggestion.
like the way the last strategic plan then had the priorities to define objectives, I would say that is key across all of these. And I think, Eleanor, is a perfect also transition into what the hopeful next few months look like for us and what I'm proposing, because I think the key part about partnership is it's two things. One, it takes relationship, and it takes shared objectives. And I think that those are two things that I'm hopeful are really key outcomes of the next few months on behalf of the department, so that we're able to really foster the partnerships necessary, not only at the EEC level, but understand what we need to do to foster those on the ground level to achieve some of these the vision overall.
Just one other comment.
Yeah.
Commissioner, one of the things, just building off what Joan said, I think the other consideration in all of this is there are some guiding principles that are central to the design of this next QRS that I think can't be just about the QRS. In other words, I think there's some theories of action baked into the QRS that really in many ways are sort of synonymous with the strategic work of the agency. Yep. So I just want to put a plug in for kind of being able to streamline and organize the principles of the QRS, some of the principles that are showing up in the PDS work and that workforce work.
Yep.
That are synonymous with the strategic work of the agency going forward. And I think we've got to be able to sort of understand all of that in a really streamlined way.
Absolutely. And I think that is also embedded in some of the themes I'm hearing from the field around alignment across initiatives, right? Exactly. Workforce is contextualized within leadership of a program that serve children and families. We have to look at the rates we're attaching that to that child and family when they show up, to the program support and sustainability that we are offering to make sure that they understand how to move up the QRIS, to the pathways and pipelines of the professional development coursework and credentialing system that allow leaders to help support workforce through increased credentials that will help them also in the QRIS. So I think absolutely, I think the key part of what I'm hoping that you hear in the next as an outcome of this process that I'm proposing is exactly trying to tie all of those initiatives and efforts into some cohesive impact we're expecting the field, that we understand and articulate the interdependencies on all of this, that financing can't be seen as a different mechanism than quality measurement, can't be seen as a different mechanism as workforce development, that from a program's perspective, it's all of the above.
Right, and to the extent that we're engaged in this, we're going for parsimony. In other words, what's hard for the field is if I don't understand how all the pieces fit together, and in fact that many of them are in service of the same goal, then it feels chaotic, right? And it feels like there's too much going on. And so I think this is the moment to say, like, really, we have like 4 or 5 goals that are baked in across all of these initiatives that have at their core capacity building at the adult level, stronger interactions, for example, between adults and children, et cetera, et cetera. So I really appreciate and want to push you and the team to get to that place where it's a very elegant, parsimonious model. Sheila.
I love that idea, and I think, you know, not to be cavalier about it, but elevator speeches, being able to go into classrooms and talk to teachers and you know, condense all of this into some really meaningful statements is just key if we want people to participate willingly.
And I'm going to, I don't know, Allison may be on the phone at this point, but just to invoke a little bit of what I've heard her feedback too, is that for people who aren't deeply embedded in the early childhood field, the more we are able to achieve what you just described is going to help those who care about the children and families we serve as well access and support us in not only doing the education and care, but also linking that with the full suite of services that families need, which I think is a key critical component of what this outcome should achieve.
There we go. I second all of that. I do think when we think about what it is that we hold ourselves accountable for, we have, I think, a really sort of clear backbone relative to quality. I think that we have to be really careful about also paying attention to access, particularly because we have a number of new pressures on the budget that are, in fact, I think, going to lead to reductions in access. And we may make a judgment that some of that reduction is okay in service to quality, but we may, in fact, be on a trajectory where there is a real risk that we are seeing reductions that are not in service to quality. And so I just want to make sure as this goes forward that in addition to keeping a very, very strong tight lens on improving program quality, that we're also mindful of the access side, because ultimately that's where it's at for children and families.
Absolutely. And I think that that's going to be I'm hopeful that this process and Chair Lusso and I have talked a little bit about this, will allow us to really articulate the reconciliation across access and quality that is not a tension on an either or, but we have to be considering both simultaneously in every step we take is, I think, exactly where I hope we can keep at the forefront of all of this. And that goes to both center-based care, but also as we're thinking about access to the suite of services in the community and family, the coordinated family and community engagement grants. Yeah, sorry, I'm working on the acronyms, I told you. But, you know, how we actually think about access for community-level hubs as well as to center-based programming. So we are thinking about everything families need regardless of their circumstance. So on all of that note, and with all of this this wonderful feedback, I am going to jump ahead to some of the proposed plan and process. I'm going to focus a little bit on the process part because I think that that is equally as important as we've discussed in a number of different domains today. I want to make sure that you understand how the process will achieve those goals we've just discussed, but knowing that those will evolve and be emerging as we go. Exactly what those goals are will be emerging as we engage with the field. So the proposed plan affirms the existing strategic directions for EEC, so what we just talked about in terms of the overall strategic mission and vision that you all had been working on and created 5 years ago. Happy to spend time revisiting portions of it, but it seems like it is not a worthy endeavor to reaffirm, to dig deep into and recreate what seems there's general agreement on as a general direction. Focus instead on the next 6 months of making sure that we are building a strategic roadmap or action plan that lays out an implementation activities for EEC, and really thinking about how that partners with and aligns with the field as a whole. And as we said, thinking about the short and medium term as well as the long-term objectives we want to see to measure progress towards that. So the proposed next steps are really thinking about a robust internal and external engagement campaign and we'll talk a little bit what that looks like, but that it really focuses on soliciting key areas, key feedback, key questions and components, very iterative along the way, and results in a set of benchmarks to support how we are measuring our impact of this implementation. And as the Secretary keyed up at the beginning, really thinking about that as a key juxtaposition to the Preschool Development Grant, which, should that opportunity come as a next phase, would offer us an opportunity to use this foundational engagement with the field and direction as a point to target those funds towards what we're hearing from the folks in the field as well. So we'll hear more about the development of the Preschool Development Grant process at future meetings, but wanted to highlight that we are very much in partnership through that development process to look at the phases that will be needed to make sure we're achieving the overall goal. So the process that we're looking at, I've broken it down into 3 phases. We have engaged a consultant who will help us with the staffing and the work of this. So I wanted to be clear, this staff here is working extremely hard. Everyone is, there is rarely a day that someone doesn't come by and say goodbye to me when it is pitch black outside. And so everyone is working really hard. We need to bring in extra capacity to get this field engagement that doesn't overtax existing staff, so we are working on that part too. Really looking then, because this will be heavy staffing on engagement, and really making sure that not only are we asking the field, but we're listening and reiterating to the field what we're hearing, so that we can co-create these metrics and these benchmarks in a way that has shared ownership as well. And that we know that the tools that we want to hold ourselves accountable to are actually things that we all agree are as impactful as we think they can be. So looking at that first stage as really starting to collect information, what exists out there, what exists out there. We know that every Head Start, for example, needs to do a community assessment. There's a number of different seminal documents. You all have been working extensively in the field to create a number of foundations and to hear some of the themes I've heard at a very high level in a more aggregated way. Also finding mechanisms, which we'll talk about in a second, where that doesn't mean everyone has to come to a board meeting in Boston in order to be able to engage with us, but actually providing a number of different mechanisms where people can give feedback aside from the comfort of their own meeting as well. And then really bringing back out to the field what we're hearing. I will say that the learning and engaging process while they're seen as 2 stages here, will really be iterative and cyclical. So it's not that one will start and the other will stop automatically, but really continuing to iterate on, here's what we're hearing. Is this right? Does this resonate? We find a lot of times, I found in my past, that a lot of programs on the ground or parents can identify the problem they are having, but what we need to know is that one problem, or is that one person? Is that the street level bureaucrat that we just need to retrain, or is that a systems problem that we need to fix something? So really going back, hearing trends, understanding if that's resonating as we go will be the goal of these first 2 phases. Then once we've gotten some consensus on these are the themes and these are really the issues that we should be tackling, the implementation issues we should be tackling, then really thinking about co-creating the common impact objectives. So looking across our efforts, across our field, and understanding what do we hope for children and families improves if we are doing all of these things better, and became able to develop concrete benchmarks to measure success that both, I think, look at obviously the long-term impact we want to have for children, but the very real short-term impact we want to have for sustainability and stabilizing the field as a whole. So I'm going to go on a little bit more into the process. So that initial phase, and again, thinking about that learning and engaging as a cyclical process, really looking at the multiple metrics, multiple ways that people will be able to get in touch with us. So we are currently looking at all of the existing documents. We'll find a way for people to upload those to us and catalog them, make sure that we have, we've been able to identify themes. Again, just because I'm new here does not mean that the work is new, and so not trying to recreate the wheel. This is not about something that necessarily, has my name on it. It's about trying to be the next step in the great work that Massachusetts has been doing for decades. So thinking about that landscape and the existing needs assessments, existing strategic plan goals, looking at some core questions that we put out there and interviews, surveys, group format. So we're talking about having a set of slides that people can bring to their own meeting and provide electronic feedback for us, where we can be invited, leadership team and the rest of the EEC team who is attending meetings could have an opportunity to either gather some feedback or help people gather feedback amongst their parents they may work with or provider networks, and really thinking about the variety of ways that we will get some really robust answers to some key strategic questions. Also thinking about a data landscape. I know our partners in public health and DCF have been working to define their own data outcomes. Certainly we're not trying to recreate a data metric internally at EEC if it exists out there that someone's already tracking. So really thinking about what are the suite of data that is already being looked at and how does that interact with the initiatives that we are planning to, or that we are implementing and wanting to see key outcomes. And then really thinking about that, again, that key iteration. This looks that way. I want to highlight the data. The one other thing around the data is that we have been, as I've been engaging with other commissioners and other department heads and leadership, is really thinking about how, if we are doing early childhood right, we should be seeing other data move, and so not looking at only what we collect, but really thinking about how our things we are doing should impact their work as well, and vice versa, so that we're able to create some thoughtful alignment, knowing that part of what is difficult is infrastructure and data utilization connections and all of that, which we're not necessarily able to take as a short-term goal, but there's still some interim steps we should be able to take in collaborating, particularly as we look at our own initiatives and where we think the impact will ultimately be. So again, I mentioned some of this, but repeated stakeholder engagement. So this is really thinking about the multiple opportunities and feedback loops that we're trying to build. Here you have here both looking at statewide learning, statewide tours of EEC, where people, certainly we will host meetings across the state that people can come to, but also thinking about how we get to other meetings that people already are at, so we're not always asking them to come to us, and then thinking very key about the engagement with staff and other agencies, as I said. So I wanted to go through what the next, what I'm hopeful that the process milestones will be, and before I go through what this process will be, I also want to highlight that, as I mentioned, we know that we need the right infrastructure at EEC to be able to achieve the goal, and that in an ideal world we'd have endless time and time would stop and we'd be able to do all of this, sequentially, but we're not at that place. We are in a real world where children and families need services every day, and so really looking simultaneously how we can also do the internal work and the internal analysis that we need to do on how we need to structure ourselves and invest in EEC in order to achieve this will happen simultaneously with key points of feedback loops across the two, and happy to discuss that more with people who are interested in knowing what our internal process might look like as well. This conversation is really focused on that external process. really looking at starting as soon as possible with some of that learning. We have engaged a consultant to help us try to get this off the ground. At this point, we have started to have some key conversations with staff on what it would look like, but now looking for your all feedback on what the overall process is before we put a work plan out and start to live to it. So the proposal at this point is to look at really thinking about October, November, and into where we are doing our budget conversations as that learning and engaging part of really thinking together, hearing from the field, putting back themes we're hearing and at key critical junctions, and continuing to get that feedback so we can hone in on what are the key issues we should be driving at. Then looking at integrating all of that together as we move towards the co-creating part at the beginning part of 2020. A key point here is we hope that the themes we're hearing from the field can also inform the board's discussion around the budget proposal and the budget recommendation to the governor, and so that this would be information you all could use as you're considering how to prioritize as we had noted, a very complex budget process and budget pressures that we will have to face, that we want to make sure that we're using information and feedback from the field in doing that. And then we will pivot to some of the drafting of the full plan and co-creating with the not only the board but also the field on what those goals and milestones should be, how we should be measuring ourselves, and what kind of tools we might have been developing or need to be developed in order to do that in quick fashion. So that is with the idea that full document, having been vetted and reviewed by the field, comes to the board in March for final approval going forward. Yeah.
And just to flag for all of you, the commissioner and I have been talking about using our time in a retreat in early 2020. So at some point there'll be, and we'll get that organized in the next few weeks, but the idea would be that around the time of this sort of full draft and co-creation, that may be the right moment for a deep discussion at the board level, with the idea that by March we should really be fully briefed and on board.
So, yep, absolutely. Before I'm going to pivot now to an example, but the key components that we're hoping that the final document actually contains. So before I get to that, are there any other questions or thoughts on the process before we pivot to the final result?
I think it's extraordinary the way you're moving things forward. I'm thrilled.
I'm glad to hear that. It is definitely it's definitely fast-paced, but I think the urgency to get this done so we can do the work. I mean, I keep saying to people, this is not the work. This is just planning for the work, right? This sets us a roadmap and a process, and the urgency to make sure that the work actually is done not only simultaneously but enhanced and really accelerated by this process is there.
It's also a nice opportunity for our colleagues internally to reflect on what has happened and where we are right now before moving forward.
Absolutely.
I think people would appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think that's it from internally at EEC. I think the team, as I've said, I have been so blown away by the talent and the dedication of the staff here. So I think what I'm hoping this value add can be is an opportunity to reflect, a step back with all the investment, all the change, and all the enhancements that have been made to the systems across the puzzle that the board has been involved in and helped lead. That we really think about taking a step back and saying, okay, how do these fit together? And that everyone has a shared understanding of that, and what, again, really focusing on the impact for children and families that we need to have. All right. Okay, so I want to, it says this at the bottom, but I want to highlight really, really loudly that these are things stolen, borrowed examples from North Carolina's plan, and so I am not at all suggesting in here that these are the specific domains that we would pursue or that these are the specific goals that we would land on. I merely wanted to point out, I think North Carolina's plan does a good job of of being able to achieve a few key goals. Many states have plans. This one appeals to me. We will continue to do a landscape of the other states' plans. I will make sure everyone has a link to this if you don't already. And obviously very happy to have others on the board who may have some lenses of other plans we should look at as examples to keep pulling those forward. But the final result, the action plan, the benchmarks, what we really want to achieve are, one, a cohesive frame for how these strategies, what we were just talking about, how our initiatives and strategies are interconnected and achieving some larger goal for children and families, not individually necessarily. Not individually, how those individual objectives within an initiative fit into that larger frame is the key component here. And then really looking at how those conversations, how we are creating goals from those interconnected strategies that are really targeted to outcomes for children and families that we expect to achieve. Again, these are not all necessarily how we get, obviously it would be great to look at third grade reading scores from children born today. We're going to have some interim steps because that's 8 years later. So we have to be able to figure out how we track along the way. If we're going to achieve, we can't be 8 years from now and say, oh, we didn't achieve it. We need to be looking at interim measures of towards a larger goal.
And getting baselines.
Exactly. Yep. So, and then the other two components is really the collectively developed definition of what we are actually trying to solve, right? How we are actually talking together that, yes, this is the strategy to achieve the problem we all agreed is the problem in the field. And that is not to say, like, not enough early childhood, is to be very targeted. Workforce is a key priority, but there are a number of components we've already discussed today that play into a workforce strategy. It's both education coursework, it is both credentialing, a linear and career ladder that leads to stackable credentials. It is a registry and a cohesive component of a cohesive frame and access point for all of the trainings and coursework that's offered. But it's also salaries, and it is also leadership and support and workforce environment, or the workplace environment. And so when we articulate the problem, it's not just saying the workforce, it's starting to dig down of are these the most pressing problems for us to tackle, and in what way, so that we're able to make sure that our goals and metrics are actually targeted to the problems we agree are the key ones for us to be solving in enough granularity that we're able to measure over the next 12, 36 months, depending on how we look at these time frames. And then again, that time frame, that time-bound targets to monitor, that we're not just hoping that 10 years down the road, but really where do we expect to be in 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, 36 months, and what is our goal to do that? So again, not at all. If you want to see the whole North Carolina plan, you can pick it apart. You can show me parts you like. Happy to look at other plans, but not at all saying that these are our problems, our goals, but highlighting that I think that these are the things that I see in the North Carolina plan, and a few other plans have different components of this that are really goals for us to achieve as we're coming up with a document and a roadmap that would help us be actionable in how we're looking at our strategies. So that is what I'm proposing. We go forward very quickly with. Very happy to take feedback both here and if other people want to process and continue to have feedback. This is very much an iterative conversation and a work plan that we hope to launch quickly, but continue to evolve as we hear more feedback. Thoughts, reactions?
Thank you. Thoughts or reactions from others? I've certainly been involved in these conversations and totally supportive of this plan, particularly given its kind of framing in terms of time and the grain size and the targets that will be measurable in shorter terms, I think, than just the visionary targets, which is great.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Well, thank you.
And the work has continued. So while we're trying to build this process, it does not mean that day-to-day activities are not happening. So I just want to highlight that it's a both and for sure.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. Thanks, everybody, for a vibrant and strong meeting as a board. And I look forward to seeing you next month. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.